Sketching video. So what we have here is a box that I made a few months ago to carry my inks safely when I travel. I have not traveled with it yet, but I felt like I needed something a bit more than what I had before. So since I don't have the equipment to build a box here from scratch, I don't have a table saw. I only have a bandsaw and it would be a bit crooked. I decided to choose some painting panels of this appropriate size. So they were already a box with a lid. So I bought two of them and I improvised with pieces of hardware. This is from an old piece of furniture. I believe I had that as a child. I dismantled it before discarding it, and I kept the hardware. And this is from an old box that I dismantled. And these were bought for a specific project that never happened. So I did not put screws at the bottom so they would lie flat, but on both sides of the thing I also have some strong brass hinges that are the same shape and size, except that they're not the same color. So I think that makes it a little bit more interesting than making them even. And I stained the box with a little bit of oil paint and solvent. And when it was dry, I wiped it off, of course, and I finished with a little bit of clear shoe polish. So, using a drill press, I created some holes that would fit the bottles perfectly, but I did not drill them all the way down. I left a little bit of the thick wood at the bottom to elevate the bottle from the bottom so that it would be insulated from shock. And there's just enough space for the bottle to jiggle a little bit. Wiggle, jiggle, I don't know. So that they won't move sideways, they won't spill over. I built, well, first of all, let me remove this. This is a rag to help catch any spill if there was any. Although I tested these bottles intensively to make sure they wouldn't leak. I built a little shelf to hold my little box of ink nibs, pen nibs. So it's a miniature box of Altoid mints that I happen to have. The shelf just lays on a raised shelf. I pierced into the wood and I left a shelf in there just to hold this shelf in place so it would hold this. The reason for the shelf, of course, is to hold this in place stable, but I needed more space for the handles for the pen nibs. And this bottom part helps again absorb the ink, if any. So far no spill, and reduce the noise as well. So this is my kit for sketching. I believe I have black ink and a brown ink, or maybe black ink and a diluted black ink. I don't remember what I chose. Oh, this is a bit tight. This looks like black. This looks like brown, so maybe I have brown and black. I don't know. We'll see in a moment. So I could leave them in the box, but since it takes so much space, I'm going to take them off. Sorry for the knocking. I forgot the traditional tapping. Forgive me. I mean, you have a wooden box, you have to do a little bit of tapping. Maybe this side will do better. I do like the sounds of tapping wood. I will not put on fake fingernails for you. Alright, so what we have here is a bunch of nibs. This is my favorite. I forget which one it is. Can I read it? This is the This is made by Hunt, and this is the 513, 513. So it's really, really wide. For a long time, I thought that I did not like drawing with pen and ink because the nibs were always too dry. I would have to dip too often. It wasn't flexible enough until I discovered these in a video online, someone drawing with them, and I fell in love with how fluid it looked, and I decided to give it a try. I immediately went to my art store, the local one, and asked if they had any nibs, and they just happened to have a big liquidation on a whole lot of things, and they gave me a special price on the nibs, and I have enough nibs to last me years. I must have bought at least 2 dozen. So, despite not working with ink that often. So, I forgot. When it's been a while since you've used your ink, it's a good idea to shake. Make sure the sediments at the bottom will mix again with the ink. Actually, it's probably wiser to, once in a while, even if you're not going to use them, shake them so that they don't settle. I love the sound of that. I'm not monitoring right now, so I don't know how loud or how soft it is, but I'm sure it sounds a bit interesting. So I don't know what I'm going to draw, which is part of the excitement. So, before I start, I must tell you a trick that helped me out. When I first started using these nibs, I thought they were not working properly, and that was because they had varnish on them when they're brand new. That's to protect them against rust. So the varnish is a lacquer, and it can be diluted with a lacquer thinner. So I used a bit of wood alcohol in a tiny container. I put my nib in it, and I just let it rest for a few minutes, like 2 minutes, and it melted the lacquer. I just wiped it off, and now the ink really flows really well. And now I don't have to maintain it that much. I just have to clean it after I use it. Sometimes I'm a bit lazy and I just let it dry, and next time I'll just use a bit of wood alcohol to remove it. That certainly helps. I've seen different tricks where people were using flame to burn off the shellac on the tips, and that just ruined 2 of my nibs before I realized it. So I much prefer using the trick with wood alcohol, otherwise known as metal hydrate. So this is me dipping. You gotta dip like deep enough for the reservoir to be filled, like now. And now I'll be able to really draw with this. Listen to this. And yes, I can go that long without redipping. So hopefully you can see the lines proper. Once I know what I'm doing, I'll try to zoom in. But for now, I'm just drawing some lines. And yes, you can go very fluid. You can, oh, I forgot. I try not to drag sideways because this is not a pencil. Old habits, you know. You always pull on this kind of pen. Some will actually do other things, but for me, I don't like the scratchy sound of the opposite direction. So if you must move your paper, don't hesitate to do that. Now, this is actually a diluted black, which I like to work with because I can always go back on top of it later and darken it. And you'll notice that I'm not moving my wrist that much. It's all about the shoulder joint. That's a trick I learned a few years ago, and I don't practice it enough. But if you want to do curves or anything non-hesitant, it's good to use your shoulders. It's a universal joint. Your wrist is mostly, you know, it goes in all directions too, but it doesn't do it very fluidly. So your wrist should be locked more, unless of course you're doing tiny details, and for this it's really useful. But for your large sweeping motion, for when you want to do something specific, you use your shoulder. It's also a trick. If you want to impress people. And why would you want to do that? You can turn your back on a blackboard or any kind of drawing surface that's big enough, and you can tell them, I'll draw a perfect circle. With practice, you would be able pretty soon to do a pretty good circle just by using your shoulder joint as a compass. This ink dries really, really fast. I keep forgetting that I don't have to dip that often. So I'm going to vary my lines now. Now the sounds you're hearing are courtesy of the Kraft Paper, the pen nib, and the fact that the paper is lying on a thick cardboard, corrugated cardboard, the honeycomb type. It's about 2 inches thick, so it's probably making the sound a bit better than my very bumpy table. I'm doing this as much for the drawing as for the sound. Somebody mentioned in the comments on my previous sketching video that they liked the sound suddenly changing rhythm. So, in your honor, dear commenter, I am implementing that more. So this is starting to look like a mountain landscape. Lots of rocky areas, especially since I started with those. Could turn into something entirely different, but we're still exploring. I forgot to mention that this nib is capable of going from extremely fine lines, to much fatter lines. It does take more ink faster, so you have to dip more often when you do this. But you can do calligraphy with these, no problem. There are calligraphy nibs as well. I don't use them much. In fact, I don't even know if I have them in my box. Now, pen and ink is really good for cross-hatching. Right now I'm just hatching. But if I were to add another layer at another angle, that's what it's called, cross-hatching. I like saying that, cross-hatching. You'll have to do it just 2 layers. You can go at another angle. Right now this sheet is taped to the surface, so I can't rotate it, so I must rotate my arm. But you can create a wonderful grading, shading and texturing with these techniques. You don't have to cross-hatch in a straight line either. You can go with curves. You can go very chaotic. My type of cross-hatching, the type I use the most, is quite squiggly. To me it feels more natural, but I do love the cross-hatching, traditional cross-hatching as well. So today, actually, I'm doing this because I was influenced by a video I saw I keep confusing them. It's either Will Terrell or Will Terry, because I follow both of them, I think, on YouTube. They're illustrators. It might have been Will Terry. He was doing a cross-hatching of a cartoon of Hellboy. It was published yesterday, I think, or maybe today, and it was quite interesting the way he was doing it. Not only with black, he was doing it digitally, but you can do it on paper like this. Not only with black, but mostly in grays actually. And instead of reserving his whites, he actually went back and he would pick out a light gray and cross-hatch on top of his blacks just to bring back some life into the drawing, and highlights, of course. And then he would sometimes go back with a bit of white on top He did the same when he was coloring, so I recommend watching his videos. You'll learn a lot from him if you're into illustration. So I've apparently been, I started making a little foliage. I wasn't thinking, I just did it. So maybe it's time I started thinking. So these could be coniferous trees. You could have even crazier branches. Nothing's forcing me to make realistic anything. It's all improvisation right now. But it turns out that it's a landscape, apparently. But who says it has to remain a landscape? What if it was a landscape with faces on it? I like to do that sometimes. So, how about this big mountain? Be careful where you touch if your ink is still a little bit dry. I try not to. Technically, I should get used to not touching my paper with my palm. Just floating above would be a lot easier to avoid problems in the long term. So I'm limiting the areas where the shadows will be by drawing a very fine line, and eventually I could go back and shade that, and I will. But for now I'm just placing everything, trying to keep moving around. I call this talking to the wind. I'm outside sometimes and I talk to the wind like that. Starting to look like it's doing something. Would this one be in semi-profile? I like that. He already had some shading on him, so that's what cued me in. I have become used to listening to the suggestions of what's happening in front of me. So these lines were there, semi-random, and didn't know what to do, so I just looked at them and they reminded me of something and I went with it. And if it fails, you can turn it into something else. The advantage of working with ink is that you can't really erase them. You have to live with it, and that's great. Great exercise. You learn not to be stuck with anything. You go with it. It sounds like a contradiction, I know, but all those lines will stay there for the duration of the project. These would be distant forests. Since they're distant, I don't detail them that much. Just want to give them a bit of a darkness, not too dark. This one will remain light. This one will be a bit darker. Could probably put some here too. So this is experimental. I've never done this before with the binaural microphone separate on a table. My recorder is up there outside of the frame, and I'm hoping this will sound really good. I did do a bit of testing, but there's no guarantees until I put it on the computer and listen back to it with headphones. this cross-hatching stuff here needs to become something else, so why not much bigger trees? Let's take a page out of Bob Ross's book and create a bold tree outline. He would probably just go with a palette or a big brush and do a bold tree, flat black or flat dark color. But I'm not as good as he is, so I'm gonna go with something a bit more subtle. Now, pen nibs won't last forever. Eventually you have to replace them. You are scratching metal on paper, so it will get dull. Now I could be doing this with other kinds of materials, such as brushes and pencils, and I may switch a little bit later to coloring pencils, for example. Chalk for highlights. Yeah, I think I'll do that. Before I go back and darken everything, I like to wait for the ink to dry, because otherwise you could tear the paper. This is just Kraft Paper. I chose it because it's brown and large enough for this project. But it's not really meant to sustain a whole lot of scratching while it's wet. For that, you'd use something like watercolor paper. I recommend something smooth for this. Some kind of hot-pressed cotton watercolor paper. I don't know about you, but I'm having fun. I haven't done this in a while. Mostly I've been sketching on the computer, and I like it a lot, but I'll never stop drawing on paper or other surfaces like it. I've drawn on pretty much everything. I still prefer paper, and sometimes cardstock or boards, even wood if it's soft enough. I like a smooth surface. It's a bit of a jumble in here, so I'm gonna try to create a bit of a coherence by putting some kind of rock formation with maybe some tree coming out of it. Now the tree's a bit transparent, but that's okay. It's just a sketch, and I can probably make it opaque later. I mean, I can, and I will. Now, when you're drawing a landscape, especially something that's improvised or composed by you, instead of observing a real landscape, think about overlapping things, going over other things, because that's a big part of what's going to make it look real. In real life, things are not just next to each other, they're over each other. One big thing hides a smaller one. The further away they are, the more stuff's in front of them. It's just the nature of the world. Drawing is, I forget who said that, but I think it's brilliant. Drawing is just, or at least I can't quote properly, but drawing is a very focused way of observing the world. When you've drawn a flower, you know that flower specifically, more than if you just casually looked at it, because you had to draw it. See, that's my biggest contrast now. but not yet. I have 5 more minutes. Actually, 4 now. I'm looking at my camera's timer. I really like having a timer on this. It shows clearly when it's gonna stop. So this was pen and ink. I prefer to use permanent inks over water-soluble inks because once they're dry, you can go back with other things, including watercolors, and they won't smear. So I'm just thinking about where the light's coming from, and it's coming from the top left. So anything that would cast a shadow is indicated right now. And of course light can come from different directions at a time. It bounces off the sky, bounces off the ground. So for that reason, sometimes my shadows also go in another direction. But there's always a darker shadow that shows you the main light source by contrast. Now don't forget there might be a shadow on the ground. Right now the shadow would probably be behind the mountain, so I'm not going to bother with that one. And this one here, since it goes in front of everything else, a little bit of shadowing. So I have different pencils and different markers, not markers, brushes. So some coloring pencils, my favorites, and I've tried so many different brands. I'll give you some common brands and tell you how I feel about them. I find Prismacolor is a bit too waxy. I find that this pencil has clay on it. Scrape that off. I find the Derwent too dry, and I much prefer the Polychromos by Faber-Castell. So these are the ones I use and recommend. Polychromos by Faber-Castell. I don't have a container for my shavings, so I'll just do it on the table. Don't worry, I got plenty to sharpen. This one is too big for sharpening. In this sharpener, the lead broke. It does happen. Did you know that when you drop your pencil, you might be breaking the lead inside the wood? So be careful with your pencils. One way to help not break that lead when you're sharpening it is to use a blade. I've never mastered it, but I like it. It's just a bit less menacing to carry this around than having a knife out in a restaurant. I do like to go to restaurants and take out my sketchbook and just hang out after I eat, of course. Well, before and after. Hang out for a bit. Come up with some of my best ideas. Another break. Another one. This pencil has had a tough life. And yeah, wow, this one is desperate. So I will use a big knife because that's the one that's the closest. And I'm gonna carefully, without applying much pressure on the lead, just shave off the wood around it. Add another break. So this pencil is really, really fragile. It broke inside the wood. That's a Prismacolor. Now because it broke, it has a weird texture, so I'm just gonna shave it off. So that's it for sharpening for now. These shavings can be used for shading if you had enough, but I don't think I have that much. So, but if you were to have enough, you could pick it up with your finger and do some interesting blushing of certain areas. That's just a trick for you. But for this, I'm just going to get rid of it. Now, nothing's perfect, but this is perfectly fine. Let's bring the back a bit back into the picture. So, I have a black coloring pencil now, which allows me to cover larger areas faster, and it does have a different texture as well. It's drier, but it's completely compatible. Like if I wanted to go back into shadow and lightly press on the pencil and just go like this, that's a much faster shading, and it's in complement to what I've done already. I'm not trying to hide it or anything. Some areas will become darker, like this tree could be definitely darker. You can only recognize the pure whites if there are contrasting colors around it or somewhere in the same picture. If you want some really pitch black blacks, make sure you have some really, really sharp whites somewhere. Could just be a little touch. Now those hills do have a shadow. You'll see I've been working horizontally a lot, but you can totally shade directionally to help shape the landscape, make it look like rolling hills instead of flat land. Let's work a little bit on this side. The left ear has been will be neglected. Now for a tree to look real, I discovered years ago that, for me anyways, a tree needs a lot of limbs to be able to live, so they look better when you have more limbs. So when you have one limb coming out, divide it into 1, 2, 3, and each limb becomes several smaller and finer. But just study fractals, you'll see what I mean. The tree grows like a fractal, probably inspired fractals in the first place. But the principle of it, I mean, so one branch becomes 3. Each of those 3 branches has 3 smaller branches at the end. And that's what becomes a more realistic tree. Also try to think that these branches are not flat and not in one plane. They actually go in, forward, and to create that illusion, sometimes you'll have to make the branches go down and get fatter when you get closer to us, the observer. Sometimes you want to make the limbs go really, really straight up, again, for that illusion of, oh, okay, it's going fade away in size. They get much fatter when they're close to us, like I said, but the opposite is true for when they get away. You want some secondary limbs. And sometimes there's a sudden bend. Starting to look interesting, I'd say. Now I'm a bit comfortable with this one because I've done so many of these improvised landscapes that I'm just revisiting shapes that I've known. I'm not taking big risks on this one today. I just want it to be relaxing for you and myself. So this is my stomach doing strange noises. And I think we're ready to try a few different things. For example, highlighting. If I want this mountain to stay mostly brown, but I'd like it to really look like it's got sharp edges and like it's really 3D, I go back with a chalk pencil. This one is called Charcoal White by Generals. You can't read it anymore, but I saw enough of it to remember. It's not really charcoal, but it's like the equivalent of a charcoal but in white. So again, where the light would hit, mostly the sharpest light point get hit with the pencil, everything else remains pretty much brown, the color of the paper. Now, I have a tendency to do that too much, so I try to stop myself before it gets overwhelmingly white. Just wanted to show you it is possible. I do this on paper, I do this digitally. I enjoy both. With the digital approach, you can actually put pure white of any size, however sharp you want it, over any color, including pure black. It won't smudge if you don't want it to. So, if I were to try to put this white over the coloring pencil, it resists me a little bit. But it still works, because I wasn't pressing too hard. It's not too waxy yet. I could of course go back and do some highlights on the hills, just where I think the light would hit. Probably hit here too. Now bear in mind, this is still just a sketch, so there's a lot of messiness going on. I do enjoy the messiness. If I were to redo this as a final painting, I'd just use this as an inspiration, and of course just keep the lines I want. Here's a trick: if I wanted to do this digitally, I would take a photo of this because my scanner is too small, or I would cut it and then scan it in separate pieces and reassemble them digitally. But with a picture is faster. Even if there's a bit of distortion, it doesn't matter, because I would just go over it. I would make the picture a little bit transparent. I would put it over a white backdrop, subdue the picture a little bit, and then I would go back with a digital pencil and redo the whole thing. Just the lines I want to keep, of course. So this is it for highlights for now. You see me work with black coloring pencil. How about some black ink? I have some Pentel Pocket brush pens. I only have 2. I'd like to have a dozen because I love them. I have 2 now. I have one that's charged with black and one that I put a diluted black in. That's why I put a little bit of a white dot in the cap to remind me that this is the pale one. So I'll show you the pale one first. I used the gray for shading. Again, I could it looks a bit darker before it dries, but it does get much lighter as it dries. So for the sharpest shadows in this one, I'll use this. emphasize some spots. But working in gray means I can build up and make it a lot more subtle than I would if it was pure black. And with these brushes, if you go really fast, it's going to start looking like coloring pencil again. But if you go slow enough, you can create really sharp lines and areas. Now this is the gray, it won't mark as much as the black. So let me move on to the black now. You'll see how sharp it is. If I go back and outline the eye, for example, maybe a nostril, the other eye. Now this one will not lighten that much because it's black. It's not diluted. If it's a mountain, if I want it to be like the main subject, I'll often outline it a bit bolder. And these trees could become like pure black, mostly. Or maybe just a little bit pure black in the middle of them to show that's where the big shadows are. Same thing for this tree that suffered a little bit from the highlighting. I love these brushes because they're compact and they work really, really well. They're the finest points I've ever seen that last any length of time for me. I realized one day I was traveling that I really wanted to use this brush, but I did not bring it with me on that trip. So I went to an art store and they happened to have it. So I bought another one, and when I got home I couldn't tell which one was the new one and which one was the one I had had for 3 years. So, and it's still the case today. I mean, both of them I still have, and I couldn't tell you which one is the old one because the tip is that long lasting. It's synthetic, and usually synthetics will actually, for me anyways, they will get really frayed really fast because they dry out. I'm really careful with them, but maybe not enough. This brush has served me well for as long as I've gotten my first one, and it doesn't show any sign of getting fuzzy, or because these bristles are probably installed in a way that makes them meet in the middle, while other brushes probably are done like that too, but for some reason these are really well designed, and not even my best watercolor brushes have been able to last as long without damage, like the Pentel Pocket Brush pen. In the future I'd like to have a few more so I could charge them with different colors. And by charging, I mean you can buy the cartridges if you want, but I only bought one package, and I'll probably buy another one when I get more brushes, because you can refill them yourself with a regular syringe and an ink of your choice. Nothing too thick, of course, but anything that's really watery will work really well with this brush. And you could probably use it for watercolors as well, just like the water brush. It's built in the same way, except it's opaque. So I don't like water brushes for carrying them around because they leak a little bit. At least those I bought. I have one from Sakura, and I don't remember the brand of the other one. Might have been from Winsor Newton, but I'm not sure. So I like them for home studio, but for traveling I still bring them, but these would be better, I think, if I loaded them with watercolor. I made a highlighting mistake here. That's better. It's a stone, it should be more chiseled. Same thing here. Forgot that sometimes you can smudge it and then go back on top. What else can I do? Sometimes you don't want to carry the whole kit of pen and ink, and you might want to use a fountain pen. This is a Lamy Safari. I was really in love with it when I first got it, but unfortunately, even when using their ink, this thing has a tendency to leak. So I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't this time. I tried with Lamy ink cartridges. I tried with another brand as well, which was Noodlers. Noodlers was good ink, but it flows too much and it would leak outside of this pen. Some people have used the same ink in the same pen without any issues. I don't know why it's doing that to me, but I love using it at home. I had bought it as an everyday pen, but I can't use it every day because it leaks. So for home, it certainly saves some time. You don't have to dip up as much. And I do like the feeling of the nib. It's a lot firmer than the 513 that I was using earlier. But for some reason, that's not a problem. I normally prefer flexible. So as a drawing implement, it's fine. I like it. But as an everyday pen, I would take my notes and sketch in my portable notepad. It has not been my solution. I was hoping it would be, but it wasn't. For years I was writing and drawing every day with a Parker pen. But then a few years ago they changed their formula in the ink. I don't know why, but ever since they started calling them Quink, probably meaning quick ink, the Quink inks have become garbage for me because one cartridge would last me anywhere between 2 weeks to a month, while in the past the same cartridges would last me 6 months to a year. So it's so unreliable. I bought so many of them that got dry or emptied or whatever the reason was, that they would stop working after either 1, 2, 3 weeks to a month instead of 6 months, which is not acceptable. So I'm going to try to find another brand of refillable pen because Parker is not reliable anymore. I used to love Schaefer, so I might try with that. The inks are not easy to find where I live, so I probably have to order them. And if they work, I'll stock up on cartridges. I mean, ink bottles. I don't like buying disposable things. This is starting to look interesting. What else? I could add a little bit of color to it. Maybe not this. Yeah, this is something like burnt umber. Raw umber, sorry, but they called it walnut brown. Again, from Polychromos, from Faber-Castell. So this could be color of the ground. I could be holding it like this too, but for some reason I've gotten used to holding it like this. It will help show that the ground is not the same color as the sky. Might even have two colors of ground. Maybe some hills will be red. Reddish. This is Indian red, actually. Like the sound of that. Now I like to do some gestural lines again to help shape the landscape. Also makes it more interesting, I think. Those mountains could be really, really bright red. If it doesn't work, then too bad. It's all about experimentation on this video. Nice. I like it. It stands out now. brown for the other mountain. This one is close to raw sienna. They call it burnt ochre. It actually is burnt ochre. Okay. See, because I didn't press too hard earlier, the coloring happens. Despite the black ink that was there, despite the black and brown coloring pencils that were there. It's about building up, not about masking fully from the start. I can even go over the chalk a little bit, or a lot. I'll probably be able to go over that. For now, those two mountains back to back or side to side are really popping out. Maybe the ground can remain a bit contrasting about that. Oh, what was that? There was something on the page. Now, if I had more colors around, I could add a bit of green to the foliage. I can still do it without green. Now I'm tempted to get more colors. I will right after this break. Just like magic, I have a whole bunch new colors. What we have here is, like I said, I wanted some brown, but then I saw all the other colors and I just couldn't resist. So again, I can go back and do some color highlights this time on some spots, just a few, not everywhere, just places where I think it would show the true color, the true neutral color of it before highlights and shadows change it. I think that makes it more interesting, more contrast, more believable. I can do the same for the red mountain there by pressing a bit harder. In this case, I know that it's pretty much all I'm going to do on it, so I don't have to be afraid to press. Although when I'm shading like right now, I'm not pressing as hard. Where these two mountains are meeting, I want to make sure that there's no paper showing, just to make sure they look like they're massive. They have a mass, they're not transparent. A bit of orange there. Actually, that was brown. I'm liking it. Okay. I could go back with a much brighter red there. See what it does. Maybe there's a bit of a reflected light on this side from a particularly bright cloud. I don't know. Now, I wanted to add a little bit of brown, green to some areas. I could possibly get a bit of spring to that fall color scheme. Don't be afraid to leave it light, especially where it's fading into the paper outside the main frame area. A little bit there too. Not much, just a bit. Now this paper really uses up the pencils real fast. It's got an abrasive surface of it. Some crafts are a little bit softer. This is a thick craft, which is the equivalent to the old-fashioned grocery bags. I have one that is much thinner, but it doesn't take as much of a beating. You know, when I sketch very fast, I'm afraid to tear it, so that's why I went with this one. actually take advantage of these shavings. Do a bit of smudging with them. This makes me think. This makes me remember a time when I would do a lot of chalk pastel drawings. I would use the Conte crayons, little squarish chalks from France, and these things are fantastic. They're stronger than your regular pastels, and I would start with a surface of white or of gray on the paper just to prime it a bit, make it already soft, and then I would draw on top of that. And because I did that, I could actually mix everything, all the layers together, and create very foggy effects. Speaking of fog and airy things, I'm going to put a bit of blue on the sky. So where do I want it? Do I want the sky to be very bold up and very light behind? Perhaps I should do that. So let's sharpen that white again. Charcoal white, where are you? Have you deserted? I can't see you. Oh, there you are. I can't see you. Please come back. Nice. Okay. So I've done this before. I just remembered that I love doing this. So I go and I trace out the outline, and in a little bit unneeded fashion, I bring it into the sky. This charcoal white does not smear as well as other pastels, so I just have to shade it. Again, not too high. Now these could become clouds, actually. Let's do this. Like the horizon light is also clouds. Why not? Mystical land. Fantasy land. Everything's possible. Now, I'm going to add a bit of light blue. Ew. This is a pastel. And this is actually a Conte in pastel form. It does smudge well, so I'll press really, really lightly. Smudge it a lot. Like really bad right now, but then I go. Do it again. This time a bit bolder. I'm gonna try to blend it in. Regret not having a darker blue of this pencil, because that would have been ideal. But before I smudge this again, I'm gonna go to darker blue Faber-Castell Polychromos. Is this on top of the chalk? Oh, actually it works. The art of being messy. I know this is probably driving you nuts. nuts that I leave these there, but I leave it there. I wish there was some kind of lake in here, but might be a bit late for that, but let me try anyways. If not a lake, at least the beginning of a pond. See, because I pressed so hard, the white won't fit. Won't want to grab onto the paper. That's what you get for not planning ahead. But it's okay. I'll show you another trick. This is a pencil that's really, really fantastic. It's called the Kimberly 9XXB. I learned about it from a video, from, I forgot his name. It's been too long. I'll put a link in the description. The artist is fantastic. He's the first one that I've heard describe a method that makes sense to me with graphite pencils. He would use a grade of different graphite pencils from, I don't know, from H to probably 9B or something. I don't know how wide his range was. It's been a while, but he would not press hard on any of them. He would never press hard enough to make the pencils shiny. And then he would go back with this one for just a few spots where he wanted pure black. Because this pencil is a mix of graphite and charcoal, and it has the advantage of not being shiny. So it's perfectly matte. So if everything else is a deep shade of gray, but not too deep, this black will stand out. So if I go here a few places, you'll see how the darkness is actually good enough to be darker on top of everything else I've done so far. Gonna write myself a note to remember to post link about pencil artist 9XXB. That would be what works. Now, to make it more like a lake, I'll put stuff around it. Foliage, something random, maybe a few rocks. Maybe even draw their reflection down. Once again, it's really a rough sketch, so I can get away with not doing too much. Could also go with a brush, the black one. Where's the black one? Here. And once again, it's a bit dry. I haven't used it in a while, and I think I'm starting to need ink in those cartridges. But that's easily done. Syringe, a bit of ink. Yeah, it's definitely in need of a new refill. But you can use it at this point to create special textured effects if you need to. Like I said before, you go here and you go fast enough, it's going to look like black coloring pencil. Now let's finish that sky. Let's add a little bit more of that blue and blend it with a darker one. More sketchy near the borders, so that when I frame it, if I ever frame it, I don't think I'll frame this one, then it doesn't look like I was afraid to touch the borders. It's just going to go straight towards them. how about a bit of color on the hills? Maybe first of all, just bolden this mountain to compensate for the fact that the sky is so bright. Let's make them contrast each other. Make sure the mountain is not hesitant in its presence. Let's bring a bit more of this red into this mountain. Why not? They're related. They're made from the same stock minerals. Let's do a bit more redness here, just an indication. I just realized the microphone's far. So what I'm doing here is basically a thumbnail in large scale. Thumbnails are tiny pictures that you make so that you can sketch fast without falling into the trap of doing too much detail. Well, this cannot be detailed because I messed it up a whole lot with lots of lines at first. But if these lines had been pencil, like really light pencil, no problem. But since these are ink, they get a bit distracting. So I would actually try to remake this painting someday. I'll keep it preciously. I'll take a photo at least and put it in my illustration folder. So someday I don't know what to draw. I could go back to this one and remake it into something cleaner. Maybe just as messy, but a mess that makes more sense since I've already tested some areas, some shapes. See what works, I see what doesn't. So I can focus on those. I'll probably put those trees on separate layers, float them around and move them. See, I need something happening here. So I brought this in contrast simply by the color and the darkness of this color pencil. I was really not planning on using colors on this, but I went with it and I'm glad I did. Now I'm actually curious to see what it would look like in grayscale. So later, once my picture's taken, I'm going to see what it looks like by removing all saturation, just to see. Looking at the levels on my microphones. Yep. Nicely done. Okay, I know your left ear has been jealous. Hill is a bit closer to us than this, so that's why I'm making this color darker and more saturated. I'm also surrounding the lake with a bit more substance. I want that tree to be more contrasting, so I can't use this red because it's already in the hills and it would get confused with it, so I'll use a bit of brown. It's a bit richer than black. That branch was way too straight. A tree's much more interesting when it's sinuous, complex. That's where the fun begins, you know. I just go wild with those branches. Sometimes I even want to how about those rocks? What color are they? Let's bring back some of that red. Now now's the time to go back and darken a few spots, because we lost a bit of contrast in those lines when coloring, so, and I can also correct the outlines a bit. Black coloring pencil, or if the brush had more ink, I would go back with the brush. The fountain pen would be a little bit, we'll struggle with it, trying to draw on this chalk and coloring pencil, so I wouldn't even try. I tried before. I know it's not ideal. Now, these are black and they were boring, so now I'm making a halo of green around them to make them look like they are green. Maybe this tree has foliage, because it is the spring. Gotta be very careful with this. I mean, come on. You don't want to ruin it. And I don't have a darker brown. Why do I keep saying brown? I mean green. It's okay. I can use a bit of black. Actually, if you mix green and red, it creates a nice darker version of each. So, if I had not pressed that hard on the green, it would have blended better, but I think I can manage with that. Yep. This is pretty much what I wanted to do for tonight, so just add a few touch-ups, saying my goodbyes as I go. Thank you for watching. If you have any special requests or types of videos you'd like me to try, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments. I'm going to take that into consideration. As long as it's fun, I might try it. And if it fits with my intentions for the channel, of course, I would like to try it. So, I wish you good creativity. It only happens if you use it. And the more you use it, the less you get stuck. So, just bear in mind that you're a human being or a thinking being of any sort, and that entails that you're a problem solver and a creative being, so you can do art. You just have to try it and keep doing it until you get interesting and fun and motivating results. The secret is keep doing it. Learn more. Take a class. Have fun. If you make it fun, then you'll have more of a tendency to do it. So don't you dare think that, you know, everybody who's an artist was born with it and finds it easy. I'm the opposite. I have to struggle with everything I do. But eventually the struggle is less and less, and start getting really proud of what you've done, and you become an expert at certain things. So there you go. I'm not an expert at this. I'm not comfortable working with colors that much, but I'm learning, and the more I do it, the more confident I get. So there are levels and everything. There will always be people who are technically better than me and artistically better than me, and that's fine because I can learn from them. Instead of thinking, oh, I'll never reach that level, why bother? Well, now I think, imagine if I could capture a tiny fraction of what they can do and put it into my work. Wouldn't that be amazing? And that switch of mental disposition has meant that I'm no longer desperate when I look at my favorite artists' works. I'm actually inspired, and it gives me juice for a long time to keep working. On this note, I wish you a good day, a good night, a good life. Do come back anytime.